All right, are we approaching readiness to start day two? Okay. As I mentioned, so first off, welcome to day two. I hope you all had a restful sleep after day one, which I think was a success. As I mentioned yesterday morning, this is a special year for SEO4. It's the 20th anniversary of the start of the project, the 15th anniversary of the first proof milestone, the functional correctness proofs, and the 10-year anniversary of the open sourcing of SEO4. And this morning, we're going to celebrate. And a few of the folks who've been involved with the project over the years are going to share some reflections and anecdotes. And after that, at the end, we'll have a discussion about the next 20 years of SEO4. And this is just this for this first hour. Then we'll have our break and then more talks. And again, I'm Nick Spinale, a program co-chair along with Ihor. And right now we have 4 people who were part of the initial L4.verified team at NICTA. And so first off, or I guess I'll ask you each a question, and before you answer, could you introduce yourself and, with your name, and I guess maybe most people know who most of these people are, but yeah, so first, Gernot, what was the landscape like before SEO4? Can you tell us about the origin of microkernels and the path from Mach to L4?
Okay, so microkernels really started back, like everything in computer science, back in the 70s or 60s sometimes, in this case 70s. The so-called nucleus by a guy called Per Brench-Hansen at the Regningscentrale in Copenhagen. And he built this, I always recommend my students to read this paper, because it's so insightful. Most of the things he wrote there would still sign off on. It was really a roadmap. The system performed badly, but it had all the right philosophy in there. And then in the 80s, people at CMU built this system called Mach, and they sort of reinvented the idea, but re-implemented it badly. They took a BSD Unix kernel and stripped it down and added IPC message passing and all that stuff. And they coined the term microkernel. So then it became en vogue. Everyone in the 80s was building microkernels. They all performed like dogs. And the culmination of that was the IBM Workplace project, where they had the idea, okay, we have 3 operating systems. This microkernel idea sounds cool. Let's all represent all these 3 microkernel operating system personalities on one system, on one microkernel. And it turned into a $2 billion disaster. And mostly because Mach didn't have the performance. And that gave microkernels a really bad name. So when Jochen Liedtke started working on microkernels, and then we got infected with it. For a while we couldn't publish a paper that had microkernel in its title or abstract, because people were so turned off. And when Jochen moved to IBM, he called it the nucleus to avoid the term microkernel. It really was toxic. And then Jochen stepped back and sort of went back to principles. Sounds a bit similar to what we're trying to do with LionsOS, which is not accidental, and sort of did a complete redesign and re-implementation and micro-optimized everything from like every single little byte, which is sort of over the top. But he showed that microkernels could actually perform, and his L4 kernel on the same hardware outperformed Mach by a factor of 20. And you don't see a factor of 20 very often in systems. And that changed the game. And then they showed a virtualized Linux on top of that. And then they produced, it was really Jochen's students after he passed away in 2001, produced this pistachio microkernel. There were a few others, but that was sort of the next major step. It ran across multiple architectures. We ported it to MIPS and Itanium. And that sort of didn't really fundamentally change the API. It changed a number of things, but its focus was on portability and also showing that you can get performance by mostly implementing in C, but having fast pass in assembly. And so that was basically the backdrop. And during that time, Kev and I did a lot of experiments with undergraduate students on picking various design choices in Pistachio that were usually the same as in the original L4, and evaluated them. How do they actually perform on modern hardware? Are they really better than the alternatives, or if equal, are they a good idea, or could we reduce complexity? And that included the virtual TCP arrays. We had already in our commercial version abandoned long IPC and timeouts and lots of things that we determined were really not necessary. And that was sort of the point where we were when the SEO4 design started, which was driven largely by Kev, based on the experience we had gained and the insights that led us to being able to significantly simplify the design as well as the implementation of the kernel without diverting from the basic L4 philosophy of minimality. If it's not in the kernel, it should be in user level, and the kernel should just provide policy-free mechanisms.
All right, that leads us to the start of the pilot project and then the L4.verified project. Gerwin, can you tell us about your experience joining the SEO4 project in 2004 and how you ended up deciding to join the project and what those early days were like for you?
All right, so I joined NICTA at the end of 2003, and NICTA was this new Australian research institute with, at the time, a whole bunch of money and a lot of pressure to figure out how to strategically spend that money on something cool. And so, doing a verified kernel was really Gernot's idea, I think, back in the day. There was,
It was actually an idea of one of the senior formal methods people, and I blocked off initially because that person was one of these mathematicians living in hyperspace, and I did not want to do a system. I'm pretty sure, had we done it at that time, we would have produced an early version of Certicos. Nice for producing papers, utterly useless in the real world. So I only got interested when Gavin appeared, and this was this guy he's a formal methods guy, but he's running Linux on his machine, and I can talk to him and sort of. And the other step was my star student, Harvey Tuch, at the time, he had just started his PhD. As an undergrad, he'd done the port to the ARM version of our Pistachio kernel and the ARM architecture. And so he knew the kernel in and out, but he also had a strong math background. And so I basically handed him over to Gavin to indoctrinate for a year.
Yep, so I did do that indoctrination. That turned out well. I think I remember that meeting. I had, one of these Dell laptops. I got Linux running, and I had Wi-Fi running, and I think Gernot didn't yet. And that might have been the turning point. Yeah, there were a lot of meetings back then, and there was a lot of discussion. Is it feasible? Can we do it? What kind of kernel? I knew at the time there was a big project starting up in Germany that was doing OS verification. With, pretty much exactly 10 times the budget that we had. My former research group, where I did my PhD, was involved in that. A lot of my colleagues were involved in that. And we decided initially we decided to do this pilot project to figure out, should we do this? Is it feasible? And in the pilot project, we did a lot of things, like a whole bunch of literature review. They actually produced a really nice overview paper that still gets cited, even though it's by now 15 years out of date. But hey, literature review. We did a whole formalization of the current L4 API. That was actually Ralph's thesis, also in the B method. And then we took a tiny slice of L4 and tried to verify properties about that. That was mostly Harvey doing that and me supervising. And we figured out a lot of things of what not to do in that pilot project. Like we said, initially we thought, okay, maybe we can do code generation. We write everything in Isabelle, and we generate the C code. And we tried that, and it sucked. So, we did not do that for SCL4. And a lot of other projects did do that and got nowhere. We tried to use separation logic. We wrote a whole bunch of papers about separation logic, and apparently everybody thought we would be using that for SCL4, but we didn't, because we figured out, it doesn't really work for what we want to do. Yeah, so we spent about a year on that, and after that, as a result, we were confident enough to write a project plan for, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to verify a microkernel. It was, I think, a 3-year plan initially. And it was slightly more ambitious. It had actually binary verification in it already. But it had two goals that were really important to us. So one was, well, it needs to be verified end to end, at least from C to an abstract specification, and we want to prove functional correctness. So verification was the one, and it has to be real. Gernot's requirement was should be within 10% performance of the best kernels around. And yes, and that is one goal that really set us apart from all the other kernel verification projects that were going on around at the time. There were actually a few of them. There were not just us and Verisoft. There was the Eros kernel. There was, well, Certicos started a bit later. There were a few more. Most of them petered out, didn't either get enough funding or didn't get anywhere, but Verisoft and us basically ran to the end. And Verisoft had very much the more academic approach of, they wanted to demonstrate more end-to-end goals, but they were willing to compromise on being real, as in, they were on a hardware platform that only existed on FPGAs, for instance, and they wanted an end-to-end theorem from hardware to even application, but the applications didn't do much and so on. So it was clear from the beginning that, yeah, I mean, maybe some cool papers, but it will never actually get deployed in the real world, whereas we didn't, we wanted to get deployed, but we didn't actually think that, it would be as big as it became in the end. But yeah, that's roughly the story. And then after 3 years, of course, we weren't finished. So we wrote an extension proposal for another year, and then that ran out. And we were almost finished. And I think that is the next question for me that I'll talk about in the next round.
There were the famous 2 to 4 weeks. Since about October or November 2008, I was always told we're about 2 to 4 weeks away. Until one morning, 30th of July, 2009, I walk in the lab and everything is blasted with a printout saying, number sorry is left 0.
Yeah, that was about that. Do you want me to answer how it came to the 2 to 4 weeks, or do that later?
Oh, sure, yeah.
All right, okay. So I didn't remember that we already said that in 2008, but yeah, maybe. So this is, in a sense, that was the start of proof engineering, because, how do you estimate how long a proof takes? Who knows? I mean, you ask software engineering how long it takes to, software engineers how long it takes to write a piece of software, and they'll give you widely different answers and be all wrong about it, and usually take longer than what they asked. And proofs are similar but harder to estimate. The main reason is you can't cheat. You can't really cut corners much. You can. Over the years, we've learned how to cut corners a little bit, how to manage scope, because you can sometimes prove less. But if you've decided on the property you want to prove, either it's true or not, and the proof is not done until it's done. Where in a software project you can say, well, I've implemented everything and I've stubbed out this feature, and you can look at it now. But in a proof that doesn't work. So there was no flexibility on that side, and then we tried to measure how long it would take us to finish, and the thing you can see in the proofs is how many of the functions that you still have to prove still have open goals in them. And we got to fairly few functions in about October 2008. I think they were all kind of TCB related, don't quite remember. It was June and Tom and me at the end. when funding ran out. Is Tom here? He might remember. He did the very last one. But basically, we had about, I don't know, 6, 7 of these open goals that in Isabelle there's a command sorry that you know, you tell Isabelle, sorry, I'm not going to prove this now. Maybe I'm going to prove it later. And so 6, 7 of these left. And each single one of them had new complications in them that meant, oh, if you want to prove that, it was a little bit like what Michael told us about yesterday with a loop in MCS where you had, oh, okay, I need to know that all budgets are always bigger than 2 times the worst case execution time. And then suddenly that's not 1 sorry, now you've got 500 sorries again. And okay, you crunch through them, that's another 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And then you think, okay, now I only have 6 left. And then you look into it again and, okay, another 500 and another 500. And so, you know, 2 weeks can be 6 months at some point. Yeah, that's basically how that happened. And we really thought we were very, very close for quite a long time. But we did get there in the end.
But since then, Raf will tell us about the evolution of proof engineering and how you all have managed to you know, manage that process. Could you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Oh, great. Kevin, what were the key breakthroughs during the initial design and development of SEO4 and the functional correctness proofs?
Ooh, the secret sauce. Before I get onto the secret sauce, I just wanted there was basically so many ingredients involved that it was very hard to actually narrow it down to any particular breakthrough. I will give, I guess, the Nicta environment a shout out back in the day for being able to effectively hire engineers to work on tough problems that most of the people that came through TS of that day went through a role where the PhD thesis clock was not ticking and they actually got time to work on hard problems for a significant period of time. So that was good. Another factor I guess Gernot's already alluded to were we probably had about 15 years combined experience when we embarked on the project and sort of had some fairly clear ideas of what we wanted to do. But if I was going to point at something that may have been the secret sauce, you've all seen it on the slides already in a few of the talks with regard to the proof, and that is the so-called design layer that it's now named, that sits in between the abstract spec and the C implementation. At the time, and I'm going to butcher this phrase of, or this turn of phrase where mathematicians prove properties that are unrelated to reality and engineers produce real code that run real systems that's basically, that's broken and incorrect. And reconciling these two sides between these chairs of these effectively 2 different religions, I'd argue that the secret sauce at the time was basically having this artifact, which was an executable spec in Haskell, that both sides of the fence had a low barrier to entry to, and an artifact that everyone could basically work on. And I think this is validated a little bit by the C implementation not being exactly a walk in a park, but let's say an implementation in the park in 7 days, which I can't imagine that would have been true if we'd started from an abstract spec. So I guess the secret sauce was ensure you share the pain around to the whole team, even when the team isn't actually bringing the same set of expertise and the same perspective to the project.
One comment that really needs to be understood is this was not just treading new territory in verifying a real-worldish operating system kernel. It was actually verifying a moving target because the system was designed while they were working on verification, and there was this fast feedback loop of changing the spec or changing the implementation, and then the verifiers catching up with. So in that sense, I've never seen anything like that anywhere else. It's truly unique, and it's amazing that the team pulled it off, because it's hard enough to verify a stable piece of code, but to have being this constant loop of changing things and playing it, basically break things and move quickly sort of thing, and then fix them up later.
Yeah, talk about a nightmare for project management.
That's all.
Great. Thanks so much.
Can I say something? Yep. I just want to say that it was, so the Haskell was really important, but what it was an enabler for us to be in the same meetings and talk about the same thing and actually understand each other. So so that we were talking about the same things, that verification could say, well, this is really hard for us, could we do it differently, and it would make sense to the kernel people. And that iteration, I think, was really the key, and it was enabled by, what Kev said.
June, can you tell us about that first major proof milestone, the completion of the functional correctness proofs in 2009?
Sure, and I mean, a lot has been said already,
Yeah, Garen alluded to.
as I wanted to mention it, but maybe what I'll share is how we sort of suddenly switched from finishing a very cool research project, to actually the beginning of something that sounded much bigger and very real and as exciting. And that's, we can describe it as going from finishing the last sorry, as they just say, in the middle of the night in an empty office, and then having to welcome a TV crew to do interviews in the lab. And so that's basically how that happened quite quickly in 2009, where, so yes, we finished on the 29th of July, which we now call the SCL4 day, the last sorry. So as Gernot said, we were telling how the sorry, so sorry is those theorems that we were counting down to 0. And on the 29th of July, we finished the last sorry. We printed that paper everywhere, 0 sorries as a message. We might not come for a few days to recover a little bit. And yeah, so that sounded pretty much like, a paper deadline that lasted for many 2 to 4 weeks with a quite large team that contributed to it along the years. But then we got hit by the impact it had. So we had always been working on something that would be real and that would have real application. But first of all, there was the SOSP paper that had actually a huge impact in both communities, the formal methods and the system communities. And having that impact in 2 communities is the key thing that Goin mentioned. So the verification challenge together with having the performance to allow it to be real world. And then, yes, we got hit by a lot of interview requests from journalists, and ABC24 wanting to do a live stream on the or a news article, and came to the lab to interview us. So a very different set of skills that we had to exercise for that part. But just a message I want to say is that so it felt like we've done something really cool on the research side of things, but suddenly we're transitioning to something that is much bigger and has been much bigger in the last 20 years as we have seen, and we are very excited to observe since then. So that would lead to the next section, I guess.
Yeah.
Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you all so much. It's just so interesting to hear all this. I think we'll transition into the next part now. So if you all could take a seat, we'll see most of you later on in the session. Thanks so much. Yeah, after that proof milestone and that paper in 2009, SCL4 seen a lot of more technical milestones, community and governance developments, and has been propelled by a series of DARPA programs. Here, first off, some pictures from those early days. The one to the left is from 2004, 2005, and the one on the right is from 2008. Over the years, a lot has happened, and now we're going to hear from a few of the folks who have been involved in these developments over the years, and I guess we'll make a quick change of plans. The plan was for folks to come up individually, but I think that the 5 of you in the room who are going to be involved in this section, I think it might be a little more efficient if we could have you all take a seat now. So that'll be in order. Ihor, Raf, Darren, and then Kent and Robbie in any order. Cool, but we'll start off with Dr. Kathleen Fisher, who was kind enough to send us a video with some reflections on the DARPA HACMS project, which Darren talked about a little yesterday, which she started and managed as DARPA program manager in 2012. So thanks, Dr. Fisher.
So I think there are really three things that made it.
Oh, sorry, I asked her what made it possible to get such an ambitious formal methods project onto DARPA's radar, and this is what she shared. Disaster. Okay, that was a bit of a spoiler, but.
So I think there are really three things that made it possible for DARPA to start such an ambitious formal methods project as DARPA's HACMS program. The first thing, so I guess they're the need, the basis of confidence, and DARPA's risk profile. So for the need, Stefan Savage and Yoshi Kono's work, they showed that it was possible to remotely hack into automobiles, and that really sets the stage. It really raised the stakes on how important it was to be able to produce software that would be much harder to hack into. So that's the first thing, the need. The second is the basis of confidence. The fact that SEL4 and CompCert already existed, demonstrating that you could use formal methods to prove important and relevant properties of real systems, not toy problems. And then the third thing is the tolerance for risk. The fact that DARPA is willing to engage in super high-risk research driven by its program managers. When the results for the quadcopter came in for the HACMS program at the end of the first 18 months, showing that formal methods really could produce software that a red team couldn't hack into, the I2O director at the time, Dan Kaufman, he commented that that result, in DARPA's view, already proved that HACMS was a success. And at that point, he told me that the DARPA director who approved HACMS, when she approved it, she told him that she thought that the program was going to fail. But she approved it anyway because she trusted the office director and the program manager that it had a chance of success and that the risk reward was worth taking that risk. So that's the kind of thing that DARPA will do. It will significantly invest in technology on the chance that it might succeed and change the world.
All right, thank you, Dr. Fisher, for sending us that video. And now, for fun, here's a video that was used to promote the SEO4 team's role in HACMS with some familiar faces. That's great. Oops. All right. So yeah, thank you all for joining me here on stage, and I'm going to ask you each question. And could you introduce yourself with your name and your current affiliation, and also the affiliation, your affiliation from whenever the relevant time was. So Ihor, we'll start with you. Can you tell us about your experience working on HACMS? Do any particular moments stand out to you?
All right. So, hi everyone, my name is Ihor. I currently work at Crichton, and back in the day I worked at TS at NICTA, and I guess it was NICTA back then. Yeah, so we started HACMS, as Kathleen said, it was quite innovative. People were getting really excited about SEO4 and the promise of formal methods to do something real. So we were working on that. When we started HACMS, SEO4 wasn't open sourced yet. And so we had a bunch of partners. We had Collins and we had Boeing. And there were two parts of the project. One was to do kind of a secure, formally verified quadcopter, and then kind of a secure, formally verified real aircraft. And in this case, it was Boeing's unmanned Little Bird helicopter, which was meant to be an autonomous helicopter. And so we had a deal where we could provide SEO4 to our partners, but not source code, and so we had to provide binaries. So every other day, we wanted to release more code to them, and so I had to sit down and compile everything, and then find the binary, take it out, put it on Dropbox, send the rest of the source code to Boeing, and then they could get the code and the binary from Dropbox and put it together and build it. And half the time that broke because the versions weren't the same. And so it was a real pain before SEL4 was open sourced, and at some point during the project they did get open sourced, and then life became a lot easier. One of the other there's two more things I wanted to say. One was that this was essentially the first people that wasn't us that were using SEL4. And so we learned a lot from that, in particular how difficult it was to use SEL4. So that was a real eye-opener for us. And then the last thing was eventually we worked together with Boeing, but we weren't allowed to see their systems and know very much about their systems. And so it was really difficult to help them debug their problems, because they'd have problems and then we'd be like, well, give us the code and we'll help you debug it. And they're like, no, you can't, So it was really remote debugging with them where we couldn't see anything. But eventually they did get it running on their systems, and they got their kind of helicopter software running on that. And it was time for, the demo where they were going to fly the little bird with SEL4 on it. And we weren't there when it happened. We were here in Australia, and it was nighttime for us. So I remember, going to bed and waking up the next morning and just thinking, like, did it crash? And then looking at my email, and it was successful, and I was happy. But it was this moment of dread, like this $1 million helicopter running on your software. It's kind of terrifying. Okay, $1 billion, I don't know. More money than I'll ever have.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll go back into cyberspace for 1 second. Toby wishes he could be here to be up here, but instead he sent us a video. I asked him to tell us about his experience working on the proof that SEL4 enforces confidentiality, and whether there were any key moments or breakthroughs. Again, a tough question to summarize and answer to, because of how much work it was, just like the question I asked Kevin, but Toby was able to do it just like Kevin.
Hi, my name is Toby Murray. I'm sorry that I can't be there at the SEL4 Summit to talk to you about SEL4's confidentiality proofs, but it's a real privilege to do so, even remotely. So the work on SEL4's confidentiality proofs began in 2011 as part of a larger effort at that time to prove security properties about SEL4. As I said at the time, that project was very much about putting the S into SEL4, provably. Having formalized the kernel's capability-based security mechanism as part of the integrity proofs, which we'd done the year before in 2010, the confidentiality proofs set out to do two things. One, to state formally what it means for a kernel like SEL4 to provide strong guarantees about confidentiality. And two, to prove that the kernel can enforce those guarantees, including formalizing how systems need to be configured to enjoy that enforcement, i.e. the policies. Confidentiality turned out to be much more interesting than other security guarantees like data integrity. The reason is because confidentiality violations are silent. When information accidentally leaks somewhere that it shouldn't, it doesn't cause obvious effects like a system crash or unwanted data modification that you can see in memory. Instead, to work out whether some information is leaked, you need to employ counterfactual reasoning to imagine what the system would have done differently had the secret information been different or absent. Formally, that makes confidentiality enforcement what we call a hyperproperty, which compares multiple system executions to detect unwanted information leaks. That meant that to formalize and prove data confidentiality, we had to develop new compositional proof theories. And along the way, we got to rediscover some interesting research on relational program logics that had been done a decade earlier by Nick Benton. More interestingly was the interaction between data confidentiality and refinement, the formal argument that was used to prove SEL4's functional correctness. Getting the two of these to play nicely together required re-engineering a critical part of the kernel, the scheduler. In particular, we had to prove that the scheduler doesn't make scheduling decisions based on secret information. To do that, we had formally specified and implemented a partition scheduler for SEL4, whose scheduling decisions are totally deterministic. Later work on mixed criticality real-time systems would shed light on how to generalize that scheduler. So SEL4's confidentiality proof was the first proof of its kind to apply to a kernel's implementation, and it was quickly replicated in the coming years by many other groups, albeit for simpler kernels. Today, it underpins ongoing efforts to prove time protection, which extends the confidentiality guarantees of SEL4 not only to cover storage channels, i.e. the contents of memory, but also timing channels. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Toby, for sending that video. Yeah, so the confidentiality proofs were completed in 2012, and down there at the bottom are some more technical milestones. And so, Raf, we heard from Gerwin a little bit about proof engineering and what that means and its kind of significance, and now we can see its impact. Can you tell us about how work on the verification of SE4 changed once it got pushed into real systems from its success? And yeah, what was your experience with the birth and rise of proof engineering?
Sure. So for those of you who know me, you know me, but those who don't, I'm Rafael Kolansky, known as Raf. I got roped in my honors thesis to do stuff in the pilot project. Then I worked with Gerwin a bit. Then I did my PhD also with Gerwin. Participated in the L4 verified project. And then I was an engineer. Then I went off for a postdoc, came back. At some point I was given the whole verification team and everybody in it and said, okay, go. So I was in charge of that for a few years, and now I'm one of the co-founders of Proofcraft, also on the less exciting wing of doing the engineering. The big thing that already Gerwin alluded to is most of these projects that you have heard of before the magical sort of 2003, 2004 time period, they were largely academic. So you come up with an exciting idea, you try to get there in any way possible, you claim you got there, you write a paper, and then you move on to the next thing because you need to publish more things. But something magical happened around that time because I think Gerwin said Archive of Formal Proofs was 2003, it started. Certicos also started around the same time L4 Verified did in 2005, also finished around 2009, and that was 100,000 lines of proof script. L4 Verified started 2005, finished 2009, functional correctness proof. That was 200,000 lines of proof script. And now we're at over 1 million. You know, like Toby's contribution, access control, confidentiality, those are in there. We had more architectures and so on. But the main difference is, well, we succeeded, and then we didn't stop there. Our friends at DARPA, Kathleen just spoke, they got us to do more. Well, okay, we now want it on a real system. Can you, but the system is not ARM32. Now we want a hypervisor. Oh, by the way, can you do x86? And then, now we have ARMS, AH64, RISC-V, and all of this stuff has to be maintained. So you're familiar probably with ideas of software engineering, and all of those also span out to doing proofs. How do you hire a proof engineer? How do you train a proof engineer to do specific things? How do you estimate how long a proof will take? 2 to 4 weeks is good when you don't know yet, but then people expect a bit better of you. So we did a number of, a bunch of research on estimating proof efforts, and discovered to our, well, not dismay, we already knew, but in terms of lines of proof, the effort is quadratic. So if you double the number of lines of proof, you're expecting 4 times increase in terms of verification effort, because again, the code goes like this, and then the properties go like that. Every property that you want about your kernel software, you have to go across every single function. And so we actually got quite decent at this. I mean, Hackams succeeded. Then there was Case. Case succeeded. Now we're on Provers, and nobody's kicked us out yet. So, yeah, and there's other things that sort of develop over time. So the Haskell spec, which initially was this really brilliant idea and definitely the right way to go, turns out that while it was initially bringing everybody to the table, the kernel people who made sure that the kernel code is fast, they weren't all that interested in Haskell. So the ownership changed from, you know, everybody together to the verification team. And then Haskell became, you know, since we had the abstract spec as well, the abstract spec became abstract. The Haskell comes as close as we can possibly get it to the C. And then we collaborate with the systems people to get us fast C code, and then we argue out a way of making it verifiable. And so we've managed to go for 15 years now, since the functional correctness proofs, and still going.
Awesome, thank you so much. Now, Darren, can you tell us about how the DARPA case project came about and how you made the case for SEO4?
Sure. I'm Darren Kofer. I, as I mentioned yesterday, was mostly at Rockwell Collins during this time, which became Collins Aerospace and is part of other larger organizations. One of the funny things about the CASE program is it started with people from, it was a Collins team and a UTRC team and a Raytheon team, and by the end of that, those were all part of the same company with all the mergers and everything. And I think also we had Adventium on our team, which became part of Galois. So there was a lot of combining over the course of the program. And my role in this has mainly been to be the conduit for DARPA money to reach the SEL4 team. So I think through all of these programs, we've been able to maintain that and hopefully support the continued improvement and expansion. And the other thing about all of these programs that Kathleen alluded to, because we had this motivating problem of security for embedded systems, vehicles, commercial, military, whatever, that gave us one of the key success factors for the program was a way to make formal methods visible. I think people have already commented it before about, you know, both formal methods and security. If it works, nothing happens, right? It's super unexciting. But all of these programs were constructed to fight against that, to figure out a way to make the successful use of formal methods visible by doing these before and after demos. So to show what you know, the consequences of a non-secure system are. We could hack it, we can make bad things happen, and then we replace that with the verified system and show things working. And that was very compelling to people in the demos that we were able to do, the quadcopter and the Little Bird, and even the helicopter sim demos that we did during the CASE program. But one of the fun things of making the case for CASE, we had all really enjoyed working together on the Hackams program and wanted to keep that going. And we had these jokes about getting the band back together, which is an allusion to the Blues Brothers. And we had a lot of graphics that derived from that. There was the Blues Brothers Briefcase Full of Blues album that you may or may not remember. We replaced that with the Briefcase Full of Proofs. And it turns out that the name of the program is CASE, and so our Collins version of that was the Briefcase program, and it had case spelled with the upside down A and the backwards E, and that caused no end of trouble to our production people inside the company, who were sure that somehow this graphic was backwards or upside down, and they could never make it look right.
Can you tell us what's happening in this photo?
Yeah, so this is, I think this was also in one of my slides yesterday. We're at the Collins Customer Experience Center in Huntsville, which is really targeted towards the Army customers, of which there are a lot in Huntsville, Alabama. And so this is kind of the final demo event that we did in 2021 or 2022. I mean, and we're all wearing our COVID masks and everything, so it was kind of awkward. But we had the demo that we were doing was based on the mission system for the CH-47 helicopter, so that's kind of what this demo is. And you're seeing, you know, some of the maps, and then like the virtual outer world that's simulated there, and they're flying a mission. And the SEL4 part of this was to re-engineer one of the platforms on board the helicopter is running on, you know, like, I think I also had some pictures of boxes with cables and things in it. So it's like real helicopter hardware that's running in this sim, which when you walk up to it looks like kind of the front half of a helicopter. And it's acting as a gateway for information going in and out of the kind of the critical parts of the helicopter. So they're doing some demos where there's some spoofed vehicles coming in through the ADS-B system to try to confuse, you know, an adversary is trying to confuse the pilots of this by putting these, you know, fake vehicles up. And we're running some monitors to try to detect those. And then we're also having a gateway that's allowing soldiers in the back of the aircraft with tablets to gather information and also receive data from the, you know, the state of the aircraft, that they might display maps and things like that, but do so in a secure way to be able to trust that that tablet's not going to be able to do bad things to the rest of the helicopter.
Thanks so much. So now moving on to Ken and Robbie, we got to hear from Boyd yesterday, and it was really cool to hear about his experiences, betting on SEO4 in the commercial space. And so, Ken, Robbie, question I have for you is following up on that, is what pushed your team to bet on the commercialization, or bet on commercialization on top of SEO4?
Sure. So I guess betting on SEL4 for commercialization.
Yeah.
And so I'm Kent. I'm currently an engineering lead at Cry10. I think this is my 10th year of SEL4 infection, as Gernot would say. And for the last 4 of those years, I've been at Cry10, and for the 5 years before that, I was in Trustworthy Systems, where I started doing AOS and then came in towards the back end of Hackams. And I guess the choice to use SEL4 at Cry10 was a choice Boyd made before I started, because, you know, I chose to work at Cry10 because there was a promise of an opportunity to push more SEL4 adoption. Boyd's, before Cry10, spent 10 years at Microsoft working on Xbox, which is an incredibly targeted device for attacks, because people wanted to be able to play free games and then sell those exploits to play free games. And after leaving Microsoft, Boyd wanted to start a company with a mission for improving the safety and security of kind of, you know, embedded systems, software running critical devices in the real world. And he no longer had the unlimited resources and talent and experience within Microsoft, because he's now just an individual. Moved to New Zealand. And so one of the big draws for SEL4 obviously was the verification, the proof of implementation and design correctness, which is kind of able to make up for all of that resource and experience, and having a strong and secure foundation that, you know, you can't do without a very, very expensive, experienced team. And so obviously number one thing is the verification. Then the second thing was the the abstractions in the capability system for allowing like dependable composition of components on top. You know, we're trying to build a platform that mostly stays out of people's way to allow them to build systems and software on top that, you know, does the mission that those devices need to do, but doesn't kind of enforce like complicated stuff on top. But then still being able to, you know, detect in advance if you're trying to load bad software. And so SCL4's capability model, the security model, kind of is the only thing that really lets you do that, where you don't have to trust every piece of software that you're writing, and you don't have to worry about properties that you have being invalidated because you've loaded a new piece of software that's just doing some analytics in the background because somehow it, you know, pushes some operating system data structure above some threshold, and now your system can't be scheduled or it hangs or something. And then, of course, I guess the economics of it was the experience of the team in Sydney, having all that experience on SCL4 that you kind of can't really get. And we weren't really going to go and do that with a different system.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Rambi Van Vossen. I'm currently with DornaWorks, and at the time I was at DornaWorks, so nothing's changed. You know, DornaWorks came out of the world of aerospace and safety, and one of the ways in which you design systems in aerospace is using the ARINC 653 specification, which puts a strong emphasis on partitioning out your system both in time and space. And so we, around 2012, were doing research on embedded hypervisors and how those kind of fit the same model of a partitioning OS, but allowed you to kind of have a little bit more flexibility in what you could actually run within those partitions and not having you so locked down into maybe a particular vendor. And so in doing that research, we found while it does fit the model well, the hypervisors available, especially in the open source realm, it was basically Zen. And Zen is massive, and that came out of the server world. And so it didn't fit the scheme very well for what we were going for. And so then at the tail end of Hackams, we became aware of the SCL4 microkernel and got excited about that, and found our way on one of the SIBRs from DARPA that John Launchberry was handing out. And from there, we kind of grew our expertise both in virtualization technologies and SCL4 itself, and tried to help expand the ecosystem of virtualization around SCL4. And we always had a strong want to be involved in open source technologies, both to gain the benefits of it being openly available, but also openly looked at by many, many people. And so that was another factor besides the very, very obvious one, which is the formal verification that brings everybody in. But from that, if you listen to Chris's talk, we haven't made much strides in the realm of safety certification of hypervisors, but we've transitioned a little bit more into commercializing with SCL4 by focusing more on security and less safety-based needs, but still trying to push that along to get to something where certification authorities can be happier.
Cool. Thank you so much, and thank you all for sharing your experiences and reflections. I really wanted to hear from as many people who are involved as possible, and of course this is just the tip of the iceberg, but there was so much interesting stuff to share that we don't have a lot of time left in the session, but if it's okay with the audience, I'll gauge by facial expressions. I'd like to go a little bit into the break to talk about, so that we can collectively talk about the next 20 years of SCO4. I don't see any big frowns, so we'll keep it going for a little bit. First off, here are some photos from over the years. This is the Trustworthy Systems group from 2010 and 2015. And then the SEO4 Foundation was established in 2020. And so we've got the summit in 2022 and 2023. And of course, we're here in 2024. It's been so great. The foundation has really been able to kind of glue everything together. So yeah, that's something worth celebrating today. But yeah, so we'll have a short little discussion about the next 20 years at a really high level. We'll make a quick personnel change up here. If Robbie, Kent, and Darren could stay up there. If that's right. And then we'll add Gerwin, Gernot, and June. Yeah. So yeah, we're celebrating, you know, the achievements and efforts of everyone who's been up here, and also the countless other people who have been involved. But also, we should celebrate the momentum that I think we all have in this room, and so I thought it would be fitting to just, you know, talk a little bit about what's next. And so to start off, do we have the microphone? Oh, great, cool. We can start down there. The idea here is for just to kick off the discussion. We'll have each of the panelists up here just spend, like, you know, say just a few brief words, just high-level idea or two about their vision for carrying on the momentum of the past 20 years into the next 20 years. How can we, the SEO4 community, continue to push the envelope and keep the SEO4 project at the forefront of formally verified system software? So yeah, we can start with Robbie, and we'll make our way down. Just a few quick high-level thoughts, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, and we'll try to keep the questions to be kind of more high-level ones. There'll be plenty of time for more technical discussion throughout the rest of the conference and the birds of a feather. So yeah, go ahead, Robbie.
Okay. You know, I've been excited to see all the OSs growing around in the ecosystem. I think it's really going to improve usability, and especially like tooling around OSs and hypervisors built on the microkernel are going to be highly effective. And, you know, we'll just need to keep seeing growth both out of usability and out of the formal verification of you know, continuation of the proof, especially seeing multi-kernel and MCS, right?
Yeah, also, I agree with the growth of ecosystem. I guess that also, you know, a lot of people talk about the need for ease of use, more tooling, more reusable components, reusable systems, shorter path to going from kind of walking up with a problem that you want to achieve, like produce a solution for, and being able to kind of build something on SEL4 and ship something on SEL4 with low risk, low effort, and kind of the ability to iterate on that. Obviously, growth in the formalization of full system, being able to prove full system properties, being able to tie user level applications to the kernel and reason about like end-to-end systems, and multi-core. Better multi-core support in the proofs, please.
Yes. Two things, I guess. One of the things that we've been trying to do through the course of these DARPA programs is to, in some ways, make use of SEL4 invisible to our customers and developers. And that's why we've been developing these model-based system engineering environments where you can do things like describe the components in a system, and this is the data flows are the ways that they communicate and exchange information, and then with very little additional effort, generate a system from that automatically that has those same properties, not just kind of notionally, but really when I say that this component is separate from this component and only interacts in this way, now we have the way to be able to guarantee that, in fact, that's true. It's not just an idea or a cartoon or something, but that's the only way that those things can exchange data. They don't look at each other's memory in any other way. If one of them crashes, it doesn't affect the other ones. All of that sort of thing that makes what you put in a model and what you analyze about a model, what you describe in your requirements about that model, actually real in the implementation. So that's the goal, and that's what will eventually let us get to the point, which I think we're getting much closer to, is having SEL4 in a real deployed, very visible system, what we would call a program of record in the military side. I think our chances of doing that over the next 5 years are pretty real, and we have folks at DARPA really pushing for that same goal.
Cool. So, I don't know, 15, 20 years, I don't know what it's going to look like. But what I would want it to look like is, the SEL4 summit is not 100 people, but, let's say 1,000 people. I don't really want 10,000, but 1,000 would be enough for me. And we're going to look back and say, remember those times where we didn't have multi-core in the proofs? Yeah, those are long gone. Of course we have multi-core now.
Nobody complains about that.
Nobody even remembers that was a problem. And everything runs, of course, on MCS, and it's fine. And, probably on the successor of MCS. And we have all the right theorems for it, and, things just work out. And, of course, from our side, we would like to be able to react to feature changes and new hardware and things like that much more quickly. And part of this DARPA program that we're on is trying to prepare for that and making that happen and so on, and not just finishing MCS, which will happen, and multi-core. It'll be there. Yeah, I think that would be nice to see in about 10 years. Not even 15, 10. 10 is enough. No, not 2 to 4.
So there were some common themes here, right? Usability is just a key aspect. And of course, that's the driver for our work on Lines OS, together with pushing verification up into the complete system, and eventually tying that with verification of application, critical components of the application. To me, the main thing that needs to happen for SEL4 to take over the world, besides the easy to use operating system, is a much bigger ecosystem of industry providing professional services, very competent professional services around SEL4. I think this is where we have a big gap at the moment, and it's a chicken and egg problem because the market isn't there necessarily to start this, and the companies companies that would like to try it don't necessarily have the competency. DonorWorks is a great exception in a way. They do great work. They are available. They are quite competent. We need more of those, and so scaling this up, I think, is the core challenge of we are facing over the next 5+ years to really make SEL4 universal.
Right. So I think I'll wrap up with a small anecdote. A bit after the after the first SEL4 proof has been finished, there was a big project, Deep Spec, starting in the US. So a lot of organization, huge budget. And I attended one of the talk from Benjamin Pierce explaining the plans and motivation for it. And he said something like, once upon a time, we thought the Earth was flat. And some crazy team of Australians just went on their boat and decided to figure out for themselves. And they came back and told us it was possible to go further away. And so we all embarked on our boats and now are trying to do the same thing for ourselves. So I am hereby predicting that in the summit 2044, my gosh, we will be reporting that, I hope, no critical software is embedded and deployed without some formal verification assurance. And SEL4 keeps leading the way by having many deployed systems that have formal verification assurance. And not because they're just based in SEL4, because they're using a lot of the technology tools, frameworks, user-level components that this community has built. So my visionary work is done. Now, this is not our mission. This is our mission. So see you in Summit 2044. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Before we move on to one or maybe 1.5 questions, just because of the time, I'll share some remarks from some other folks. I asked Adam from NCSC a similar question. He shared this quote, and I'll read it. NCSC look forward to seeing SEO4 and its community of users grow and thrive, enabling the use of provably secure systems to help provide rigor and confidence in the assurance of critical designs used to protect the interests of the UK. We have worked to support making the technology more accessible to a greater number of users and are excited about its unique guarantees being more easily accessible to non-experts. We would love to see SEO4 and formally verified technologies like it become more mainstream and lift the level of cybersecurity throughout the industry. So, thanks, Adam. A similar sentiment there. And just quickly, Dr. Fisher shared some higher level thoughts as well.
So thoughts to share on the history of SEO4 and its upcoming 20 years. So the work that the SEO4 team has done is incredibly important. I don't think I could overstate the importance of SEO4. As I mentioned previously, HACMs probably wouldn't have been started if SEO4 hadn't already been proven correct, because its existence was a crucial basis of confidence for HACMs and one of the key reasons why the director was willing to approve the program in the first place. Secondly, HACMs wouldn't have been successful without SEO4 because its separation guarantees are what allowed the team to isolate the red team code from the flight controls on the unmanned Little Bird. And that's what let us fly the unmanned Little Bird while the system was under attack, which is one of the key things that people find so persuasive today and why they're willing to take a chance on formal methods being relevant for real military systems. And finally, SEO4 and its many descendants are vitally important for a future where software vulnerabilities are not the low-hanging fruit that they are today that enables attackers to break in and take over control of our critical infrastructure. So SEO4 is a vital part of our future. So please keep up not just the good work, but the vitally important work.
Okay. Thanks again, Dr. Fisher. So now we're about 10 minutes over. And we can't spend all day celebrating. We'll have to get back to work, which is really what it's all about. But maybe just because it would feel wrong not to, we can do maybe one question or 1.5 questions. Okay.
Not a question, but you missed the ACM System Software Award on your timeline. That was a bit of a milestone. ACM Award.
Oh, that was a big deal. That was recent.
Yeah, last year.
That is a big deal. So thank you for. Yeah, there's not enough space for all that good stuff. Okay. Any questions? All right. People might be psyched to get to the break, but I'm glad we got to hear the thoughts of this panel and all the others who participated. Thank you so much, and thank you all for bearing with us into the break.